guys hear that? My kid going nuts.
Enjoying the sunshine while he's got it.
And we're live.
All right. Hello, everybody. My name is David Carlson. I am the Eau Claire County Regional Organizer for the ACLU of Wisconsin's Rights for All campaign. Thank you for being with us tonight, either by Facebook Live or on Zoom. I'd like to start off, well, this is going to be a presentation or panel discussion on voter suppression, felony disenfranchisement, and then what we're doing and other groups are doing in this area to combat both voter suppression and felony disenfranchisement. But first, I'd like to introduce you to my panelists. I'm going to let them introduce themselves, starting with Melissa.
Hi, I'm Melissa Janssen. I'm a almost lifetime Eau Claire resident, and I serve as Eau Claire County Board Supervisor for District 25 on the north side.
And I'm Karen Voss, and I live here in Eau Claire and have lived here for almost 40 years. Retired from the Department of Natural Resources, where water quality and such were of great interest to me. I've always been a strong conservationist and also a member of the ACLU and really a believer in the rights of every voter. I'm one of the organizers of a local group called Chippewa Valley Votes. And our mission has been to reach out to voters and to help level the playing field for access to voting and to help every voter take advantage of their right to vote. We've been active in the community and have worked with a number of disadvantaged populations in terms of voting, including the elderly and residential homes, school kids who are turning 18 in high school, and anytime we can in public, just helping folks get registered to vote, trying to level the playing field.
And I'm Nycki Wallsch. I am a member of EXPO and Free here in Eau Claire.
EXPO, Ex-Incarcerated People Organizing. For those that don't know, you guys are pretty well known though, all throughout Wisconsin. So thank each of you. I'd like to, well, first, the ACLU Wisconsin is a nonpartisan organization. We engage in political discourse, but do not promote specific political parties. We promote democracy, civil liberties, and giving voice to marginalized populations. I would like to start tonight with a statement from the ACLU of Kentucky. Once again, a prosecutor has refused to hold law enforcement accountable for killing a young Black woman. Breonna Taylor should still be alive today. We join the Taylor family and the community in protesting and mourning the Commonwealth's choice to deny justice for Breonna. Breonna Taylor was killed when plainclothes officers used a no-knock warrant to enter her home in the middle of the night. They did not even perform life-saving measures as she took her last breaths after they shot her 5 times. Throughout this tragic series of events, including today, the police and prosecutors continuously have failed Breonna Taylor, her family, and Black Kentuckians. This outcome shows us that true police accountability does not exist in Kentucky. Police accountability will not exist until every level of government works to prevent police violence and hold law enforcement responsible every single time they have used their power, not just in high-profile cases. The results of this investigation reflect insufficient standards for police use of force, government-sanctioned violence and terror in communities of color, and a need to completely rebuild our justice system. The ACLU of Kentucky will continue working with community leaders, activists, and elected officials to radically change policing so this never happens again. Moving into this panel discussion, I would first like to start by taking a moment of silence for Breonna Taylor. In discussing voter suppression and disenfranchisement, we are addressing one of the many tools that has perpetuated white supremacy in this country since the moment Blackness became codified in law as being synonymous with undeserving of justice. This is what I would like to frame this conversation tonight, starting with. I want everybody to realize the gravity of this topic, even though speaking in it or about it as we are tonight, it may not seem like it is connected to everything that is happening right now in our society. It very much is. All right, I'm moving back into like Nycki and Melissa. So Melissa, you can go first. I just would like to know, Karen gave a little bit of what her background was, moving into activism, political engagement. How about for you, Melissa?
So for me, my political activism really took off in college. I was engaged in high school, proud North Husky, UW Eau Claire, blue gold as well. But when I was in college, that's when I really started to get interested in politics. And so the first big campaign that I worked on was Fair Wisconsin Votes No, and actually ended up switching my major to political science. So I had a political science and a Spanish double major. After I graduated, I moved to South America and taught English down there for 3 years. Met my husband there and decided to move back to Eau Claire. I think growing up in Eau Claire and spending most of your time here, you don't appreciate it, and getting away gave me that newfound appreciation for our community. And so when I came back, I worked as protective behaviors educator for the Family Support Center. Then I was at the Boys and Girls Club, and now I'm a financial educator for Royal Credit Union. And I love all of those things that I do, but I wasn't using that political side. And I think one thing, if you make the time to actually talk to local elected officials or even state or federal elected officials, a lot of times what you'll find out is the reason why they ran for office is because somebody else came up to them and said, hey, I think you should run for office. And so that is what happened to me. I got a phone call and, somebody said, you ran a Young Candidates Academy. That was your internship when you were in college. You have a political science major. And the supervisor that was in my District 25 previously was considering not running for re-election. And so I called him and confirmed, and he was not planning. And so I ran. And so now I am in my second term on the county board. And the reason why I chose county board specifically to run for is because it really does a lot to protect our most vulnerable populations. So it's got health and human services in there. It has our jail, it has aging and disability resource, our veterans. And so that was really what sparked my passion to be there and to bring a fresh perspective to the board. So it's been a great honor and a privilege, and kind of what my goal now moving forward is, how can we accomplish more together? How can we do more partnerships like this, where we're getting community groups and the elected officials involved in these types of conversations. So I'm just thrilled that David, you asked me to be a part of this conversation today.
Thank you. I appreciate you coming and engaging in it. Nycki, how about yourself?
So growing up, I never got into politics. I never voted and everything. In 2015 was my first time I got arrested. And 2016, I became a felon and my voting rights were taken away from me. I never realized how important my vote was until that happened, because they take your vote away for a reason, because it is important. So I spent almost 4 years on felony probation. I was working, paying taxes, an active member of society in my community. I had kids in school, but I couldn't even vote for the next school board member, in my own community. That kind of was something that led me into working with EXPO, Ex-Incarcerated People Organizing. And that's really kind of where I started getting into to all the work, the political work, and engaging in all of this.
Yeah, I really appreciate you being on here too, Nycki. It's really cool for me because one thing, and I was going to touch on this a little bit later, but I'll cover it now, is I feel like disenfranchisement in general, or not being engaged in politics for me, and from a lot of others that I've seen, was almost something like it was passed down from like my parents, and then passed down to my parents from their parents. You know, I was completely unaware of anything to do with politics. My upbringing, I didn't take school very seriously until like my last 3 years of school, so I missed out on a lot of just education about the structure of the government, the importance of elections, things like that. And it wasn't, I mean, I served in the Army before and still had no idea about politics, but I knew my commander-in-chief was the president. That was about it in my own chain of command. But it was after my personal incarceration that when I got out, 2015 also, that I became involved with EXPO. And it was through EXPO, Ex-Incarcerated People Organizing in Eau Claire, that I started to get informed on dealing with, just talking to candidates first, working with individuals that were part of people's campaigns, and just understanding the importance of being involved, especially for, the goals of organizations like EXPO, which is, bringing civil liberties back to individuals who have been, disenfranchised, marginalized by the criminal justice system. So it's really an honor to have you on here tonight, Nycki. And it's just really cool to have you part of this discussion. So first we're going to go into voter suppression. So just the general definition of voter suppression is either preventing or discouraging people or groups of people from voting. And that can be either legal or illegal. So I'm sure that we could just use this year to think of some ways that voter suppression has taken place. I'll see if any of the panelists have any suggestions or examples they'd like to throw out first.
Well, obviously the spring election, I was running for re-election, and so that was a very interesting time because it was the first time that we had to deal with voting in a pandemic, and how do we make sure that people can vote safely in a pandemic and don't have to choose between having their voice heard or risking their life and potentially becoming infected. I think one of the saddest cases that came out of Wisconsin is what happened in Milwaukee. I mean, they went from 182 polling locations down to 5. And so I was just reading a study recently. It was on NPR, and I think it was by the Brennan Center for Justice. That's who had done it. And, because some of the arguments had been, well, a lot of people, not just Black people, were affected by the closure of the polls. But they actually did a study, and the non-Black voters were reduced by 9.9 percentage points, whereas the Black voters were reduced by 15.9 percentage points. And so I think that was one that is a huge example, the closure of polling locations and what effect that can have on communities. And there were folks that stood in line for hours and hours because they were determined, and they thought that there might have been some motivation behind it. There was a very important Wisconsin Supreme Court decision on the ballot. And so I think that's a very clear example in our state in recent history.
Yeah, I think you got it.
I also had an experience that really struck home with me. I was doing, helping with a voter registration event at the homeless shelter in downtown Eau Claire. And a woman wanted to get registered to vote, but she had been living in her van, I think, before her coming to sojourn her house, and her van got stolen, and along with it, her driver's license got stolen. And so she didn't have a driver's license, and she had actually tried to see about getting her driver's license replaced. And it would have cost her over $30 to replace her driver's license, which she could not afford to do. And so she thought about getting a Wisconsin ID for the purposes of voting, which she could have gotten free. But if she had done that, it would have invalidated her driver's license, because you can only have one form of identification at a time in Wisconsin. And she couldn't, if she had gotten that free ID, she would not have been able to afford to get her driver's license reinstated if she had been able to find it. And she didn't want to lose her driving privileges. So she was between a rock and a hard place because of the costs associated with getting this photo ID that she had to have in order to be able to vote. And I think the other thing that often really strikes home for me is the closure of the, or limits in hours on the DMV offices around the state. I mean, there's some offices that are open one Tuesday of the month for 3 hours. That's not exact, don't quote me on that, but the hours have been greatly reduced. And then even in Eau Claire, where our DMV is on the outskirts of town, and if you don't have a car, getting to the DMV during the hours that the DMV is open can be a real challenge. So all these things are barriers that get thrown in front of people that that for whom having transportation or having the time to get off work is just a much bigger challenge than it is for many other people. This is disenfranchisement. This is unequal access to the ability to vote. And these are some of the things I think we really have to recognize, that if you haven't experienced it, you often just don't even know about it.
Absolutely. Maybe you guys can answer this question for me. I think that it's something that would prohibit you from using your ID, but there was a couple that came up to me and they had a hyphenated name, but in the ID that they had, it wasn't hyphenated. And they were concerned that they were not going to be able to cast their vote because of that discrepancy between what the records had with the hyphen and with their ID. Is that the case?
Well, what's the case is that there's two databases that have to talk to each other, and that is if you're going to vote using the online My Vote app, that relies on the Department of Motor Vehicles database. So whatever is registered in the Department of Motor Vehicles for your name or your address is exactly what you have to use when you're registering to vote using the My Vote ID or the My Vote app. So however it was on the driver's license is the way they would need to apply for or to get their voter registration. And they'd have, if their driver's license was wrong, they would have to get that fixed with the DMV before they could use their name as they wish to use it on their voter registration.
Okay, and I mean that's what it really is. It's just that's what voter suppression is about. It's not necessarily masses at one time, but it's just small percentage by small percentage. It all adds up. Something that I wanted to read right now that came from an article from 2013 in The Atlantic. It's really touching on what we'll be moving into with felony disenfranchisement, and I mean, in addition to voter suppression. But this is speaking on voter suppression here. It is common to regard voting as a privilege, and that's quote unquote privilege, an incident of citizenship granted to some but not all. The quote unquote privilege over the years has been made dependent on literacy or long residency in a community, or ability to prove identity, or a lack of criminal past. None of these conditions would be allowed to restrict free speech or freedom from unreasonable searches or the right to counsel, even though each of those constitutional rights, or each of those rights is mentioned once in the Constitution, which I believe the right to vote is mentioned 5 times in the Constitution. The right to vote of citizens of the United States remains a kind of stepchild in the family of American rights, perhaps because it is not listed in the Bill of Rights, being the first 10 amendments, and perhaps because Americans still retain the framers' ambivalence towards democracy. I thought that was a really time-appropriate excerpt from that article. So here in Eau Claire County, when we talk about voter suppression, Karen, you gave a great example. Is there any other examples from Eau Claire County, would anybody like to touch on before I jump into my evaluation of it, limited evaluation of it? Okay.
I
Yeah,
have
so
one thing to add. I just like the literacy piece of that you just mentioned is something that I really had not thought about as much until I moved down to South America and I watched how a different voting system in a different country works. And so there's a lot of different language. Ecuador is a small country, but it has a lot of different languages that are spoken within it and different literacy levels. And so one of the things that they have on the ballots is they actually have the photos of every single candidate that's running for office. And that was something that just growing up here and being surrounded by our voting process was something that I had never thought of before.
absolutely. So yeah, as far as suppression in Eau Claire County, like Karen said, she gave a very good example of it, and then the hyphenated or the unhyphenated ID when the person's name was supposed to be hyphenated. But in large part, one thing that I have been impressed about was it seems like at least the Eau Claire municipality, they've done a great job to ensure equal access to the ballot. I think that part of this can be attributed to the electoral advocacy groups that we have in this area, Chippewa Valley Votes, EXPO, Wisconsin Conservation Voters, Vote Mob. We have a lot of people working on these things, and I think that it shows. And I just know from going around like during the spring election that the lines that you saw on Facebook and some of like either in Milwaukee or Madison, we didn't have that here. So I think that that is a positive for how the elections are running in this area. All right, moving into felony disenfranchisement. So what is it? So it's just the loss of the right to vote due to criminal conviction, typically a felony, but we're also going to move into non-felony incarcerated person disenfranchisement. So in Wisconsin, what felony disenfranchisement looks like is you get sentenced, you get a certain amount, it's called a bifurcated sentence. You get a certain amount of time in prison or jail, or prison to be exact. You get a certain amount of time in prison, and then you get a certain amount of time on extended supervision, right? So extended supervision is very similar to what parole used to be. So the law is that you have to have completed your completely finished your sentence, both in and out, prior to being able to vote. So for me, I said in the beginning that I am unable to vote. I've been out going on 6 years now, and I still have until 2030 until I'm eligible to vote. So that is, it's a long time. So that is something that a lot of people are dealing with. And Wisconsin is well known for its lengthy extended supervision sentences. So that is felony disenfranchisement. It looks different from state to state. A couple statistics about it. There are over 5.3 million citizens nationwide unable to vote due to felony convictions. So like I said, in other states, I think there's a handful of them where you lose your right to vote for life after a felony conviction. That 5.3 million is taken from ACLU, but I saw with the Justice Project, they had it at 6.1 million. So somewhere between 5.3 and 6.1 million people disenfranchised due to criminal conviction in the United States. Nationwide, 1 in 13 African Americans of voting age is disenfranchised due to criminal conviction. That's 4 times greater than that of non-African Americans. That's the sentencingproject.org. In Wisconsin, 1 out of 9 African American Wisconsin residents are disenfranchised due to criminal conviction. So situations similar to mine. Over 62,000 Wisconsin residents with felony convictions are barred from voting. Only 39% of those disenfranchised are in prison. So 39% of the total 62,000 are in prison. The rest are free. African Americans comprise 39% of disenfranchised population in Wisconsin, yet only 5% of the Wisconsin population. So when we talk about overrepresentation in just about everything negative that occurs in Wisconsin, African Americans typically are the highest percentage of those overrepresented, whether it be incarceration, felon disenfranchisement, violence, victims of violence, several different things in society that are obviously part or caused by systemic racism. So those are some statistics on felony disenfranchisement. Let's quickly touch on non-felon disenfranchisement. And Karen, I'll let you take that one, actually.
So this is really interesting, and I just came to this very lately, thanks to David, who asked me if, as one of the coordinators of Chippewa Valley Votes, to write a letter to Eau Claire County Sheriff asking them, basically using what ACLU has put together, which is a list of basic criteria to be part of a jail voting program that each jail sets up should be setting up as a goal to meet these target things, such as having an individual who is focused on, who has in their job description essentially to be the point person for a jail voting program, having ways for inmates to get the information that they need about candidates and when elections are being held, getting themselves registered to vote, getting absentee ballots, a various number of points like this, and developing a protocol within the jail to assure that this kind of activity can carry on. And lo and behold, first of all, just a tiny, tiny number of jails in Wisconsin have anything, even the rudiments of a program like this. So I wrote to the sheriff, and I don't think, you can correct me if I'm wrong, David, but I don't think we expected the reaction that we got. There's an individual, Captain, oh boy, help me pronounce his last name again. Rivestall. Rivestall. Yeah, so he's the jail administrator and is also fairly passionate himself about the importance of voting for everybody, and clearly is invested in having having folks in his jail be able to vote if they can. So he was very receptive. He has already gone through a lot of the steps that the ACLU had recommended in setting up a program. It seems to me what the missing link for him is how to actually get the rubber to meet the road, to actually sit down with inmates and get them, offer them the opportunity to vote. But he'd done a whole bunch of the groundwork, establishing computer kiosks at various locations that would be accessible to the inmates in the jail, and setting them up with the kind of information they would need, like information from the Wisconsin Elections Commission, the My Vote link, bring it to the ballot, and other important links that provide information and access to the ability to see what your voting, whether you're registered, if you're registered, to make sure your address is up to date, if you wish to get an absentee ballot. He'd done about a lot of this footwork already, based on the guidelines that ACLU had provided to them. So this is a real cooperative effort. And then I told him about Chippewa Valley Votes, and that we could provide volunteers to help with the registration process. So now, in the matter of less than a week here, we attended a committee meeting that Melissa was part of, and David and I met with him this afternoon, Captain Rivestall, and kind of ironed out what we can do to get this rolling. So lo and behold, in a week or so, I think our date we have selected is October 6th. He's going to be letting the inmates know that the opportunity to check their voter registration, to get registered, and to request absentee ballots is going to be made available to them, and we're going to be there to help them get registered and possibly be ready to vote in time for the next election, which I think would be a real, would be just great. We'd be really happy if that all worked out. And I'm quite optimistic that we will be getting, that this process that we're in right now, this process of actually meeting with voters, it's going to be messy. We're going to find roadblocks that we maybe didn't expect. But we're going to be able to work them out. And we're going to end up in the long run developing, I think, what could really be a model for Wisconsin. There was very few, if any, maybe you can speak to this, David, of other jails that have started to do this. And so I'm excited. I think this is a real opportunity. And I think we are working with a jail where the administrator is really invested in seeing this happen. So I guess it's check back with us in a short while and we'll have more information to come, but we're way farther ahead on this than I ever thought we would be last week. So you got more to add to that, David?
You covered it. Just like this process, you were definitely did the heavy lifting with this process, and I very, very much appreciate your collaboration and your knowledge with all of this. And it is a great thing. I think that this would be a great time, really to just talk about, how it feels to not be able to participate in these activities that basically define being a citizen, right? Being an American, United States citizen, or being an American, right? How it feels. I kind of explained that a little bit earlier, but Nycki, did you have anything further, like from your experiences, either locked up or after, where maybe touching on, how it feels to not be able to engage in the political process, and does that contribute to recidivism, right? Does that contribute to remaining marginalized? Like, just your thoughts on that.
I think it actually has a big part of all of that. I know for me personally, it was really disengaging, and it kept me feeling like I wasn't a part of my community. I wasn't a part of anything. Like I was over here, I was outside the box, and it was really hard to not be able to take part, even in like smaller elections, to like I said, like about school board member, when we had a new school board member coming in, I couldn't even vote, and that's my kid's school. This is stuff that really affects everybody, and, especially our families, and then to not be able to take part in any of it it's really hard.
Absolutely. And it really perpetuates, that cycle of disenfranchisement, because once again, then if you aren't a voting constituent, well, then the politicians are not going to come talk to you, right? So they never hear your voice. But now moving on to kind of one more perspective. Melissa, having heard the arguments for having this ACLU jail voting toolkit submitted, having arguments for, putting together a process from where you sit, on the Judiciary and Law Enforcement Committee. Tell me your thoughts and just what that process has been like.
I am just so thankful that we have you out there being the voices and bringing this information forward and working to be that voice for those people, because I don't know if we'd be as far along as we were without, Karen and your efforts and things like that. We're really excited about it. I'm excited. I do believe that, the work that we're doing together is going to set that precedent, and we are creating documents that can be replicated by other counties and other correctional facilities across the state. So I'm really excited about it. I think one of the things that that kind of Nycki mentioned is, those smaller local elections, but that's where you can have the most impact on your day-to-day life, is working with those locally elected officials and those local lawmakers and things like that to get the changes that you need. And so it takes persistence to get things done. And so these meetings that we have, they're always open for public comment. We encourage people to come in. I think one good thing that has come out of this COVID environment that I am going to continue to fight to keep is the fact that a lot of these meetings have moved on to a digital platform and a Zoom platform. And while even after we move back to in-person, it's been able to give the community more access to come in and to share their thoughts and to share their ideas. We've also started a new precedent of, if you send in an email, we'll read it for you during public comment, because we realize that people have a lot of things going on. They have families. They can't be coming down to the county board offices to attend these meetings. And so I'm just so thankful of the work that's been done, and I look forward to seeing it be replicated in other places. I'm also very thankful that we have some of the tools in place that we might not have had before. So one of the big things that's going to make this really helpful is we do have a dedicated social worker in the jail that can kind of help to lead this. Other jails don't have that. And when I started my tenure on the county board in my first term, that wasn't something that we had. And so knowing what resources are needed to make it successful, and we'll learn a lot along the way together, but we'll document it the entire way, and we'll be set for the future. So I'm really, really thrilled and excited, but it wouldn't be possible without the community's help and assistance. So just another plug to stay involved and stay active.
Absolutely, and that's since you mentioned the social worker in the jail, that's it's been a step-by-step process getting to the point where we're able to now act on the things that we're acting on in this time, right? So going into the jail and initiating this voting process. Well, in reality, that social worker came in, 2 years ago or so, and that was a whole process under the Justice Assistance Grant. So it's like, I know for myself, I become frustrated sometimes when I don't see immediate action. But I think that's the importance. It's a good lesson for me of really just trusting the process, in a lot of cases. And so, I appreciate you bringing that up. Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, it is a process. And that is one of the things that, unfortunately, things take time, and you just can't give up. I know that one of the things that Supervisor Kronk and I have been working on is we want to get some representation of somebody that has lived experience on our Criminal Justice Collaborating Council. That's something that we're really passionate about, and it didn't happen this first go round, but we're still going to continue to work on it. So just, it's hard not to get discouraged, but if you do keep at it, you can make that change.
All right. So I kind of wanted to go into, messaging is a huge thing. I say this just nonstop because it's like people, they separate, the messages being communicated and the outcomes that are happening, right? As if these two things don't overlap or interconnect. And I think that messaging is hugely important. So we have, Facebook posts that are, put out, displaying people with criminal convictions or recent arrestees in the worst light possible, right? And then, hundreds of just vile comments about the person's character, about the crime, about the mistake they made. This kind of messaging sends, puts bad ideas in people's heads. It's like a form of propaganda. And so one thing that I would like to, first we can acknowledge, what are arguments for felony disenfranchisement? Proponents of this type of disenfranchisement or these type of laws, what are their arguments for keeping felons away from the vote? Anybody can take that if you have an idea. Otherwise, if you don't, I can come up with a couple. I can start with a couple. So one, individuals who have committed a crime have broken the social contract and therefore are no longer eligible to participate in civil society, right? So it's like we all make mistakes, but since you got caught, you broke, this social contract that we have, and now you're banned. You're banned for good, right? That's one idea. Another one is felons have shown poor judgment and therefore should not be able to participate in the political process. That dates back, that line of thinking dates back to, I think they were called pauper laws. Have you guys heard of these? This is all the way back in late 1700s, early 1800s. Paupers, people, really poor people were prevented from voting because they were not able to be well informed. They were not smart enough to participate in the vote. And so this was something that was common, you know, throughout the 1800s were pauper exemptions or exemptions or something like that. But that's the same line of thought, right? So now that because you're a felon, you lack the moral basis for participating in the democracy. So I think that there's quite a bit wrong with those ideas, and I think that I've kind of stated some of it. You know, we all make mistakes, but some of us get caught and convicted. So, and then also depending on where you are, you grow up in, you know, urban environment, there's a strong likelihood that you're going to have more police contact because there's more police in your environment, right? So, yeah, any ideas for combating those two ideas that proponents throw out there for felon disenfranchisement, or are we good with those?
Can I offer a comment? It seems to me that what we need in opposition to that kind of language is to, you know, stories are important. Everybody's story is important, and people like to hear stories as much as they like to do anything else. But I could envision short stories with a photo saying, my name is, I am a felon. I'm also a parent. I have children in school. I'm active in my PTA. I contribute to this or that. I volunteer for this or that. I can't vote.
Yeah, that's excellent.
You know, I just see the injustice to be honest, Dave, when you said how long it will be until you can vote, I did not know that, and it just knocked me off my feet. I look at the contributions that citizens who happen to have been felons contribute to our society and think about the unfairness of, when you think about all the people that, the non-contributors who have the right to vote and don't bother to take it up and don't bother to vote. And then there's folks like you and like Nycki who are active contributing citizens to our society and have paid their, if that's the way you want to call it, have paid their dues and yet are here still unable to contribute, but with their vote, which is such a critical way of being able to contribute to our society here.
Yeah, oh, Nycki, we're gonna go? Sorry.
No, I was just gonna bring up, you know, I love that idea of getting like the face and the story out there. Also getting out into the community and educating people, I think is one of the huge things too. Especially when it comes to people that have been felons. For Unlock the Vote, they wrote up a couple pieces of legislation trying to get, trying to restore the voting rights for felons. We went out and we were canvassing, and 3 out of 5 gentlemen that I ran into all happened to be felons. 3 of them didn't know that they could vote again. They're like, no, I'm a felon, I can't vote. And I was like, no, sir, if you're not on probation or parole, you can vote. And the one guy hadn't voted, he's since the 80s when he got out. So that's like 40 years this guy has been silenced because he didn't know, you know? So I think education's a big piece too.
I agree 100% with education on all levels. I think there's fear too. I mean, there was a woman from Texas that was sentenced to 5 years because she voted when she wasn't able to, and that's, you know, that's created a lot of fear with people. I've gotten out. I don't want to go back for something like casting a vote. It's not worth it for me to risk it. And so I think that's one way, is educating the folks that actually have regained their right to vote and things like that. I think another, you know, just really looking at the history of this all. As you started at the beginning of this, David, this is all connected with everything else that we're seeing. You know, if we look way back to, you know, our neighborhoods. That goes down to redlining. Why are some neighborhoods more policed than others? Why is a Black person in Milwaukee 12 times more likely to be arrested than a white person? It's all connected. And so when we look at that and when we compare, you know, the sentencings that a Black person receives and a white person receives for the same crime and the amount of supervision that they are given after they have served, you know, it's just not fair. And so until we can fix those problems, you know, we have no business. As Nycki shared, by allowing people the right to vote, they are more likely to be involved in their community, to be active in their community, to feel like their voice matters. And there have been lots of studies that have shown that it actually does reduce recidivism. There's been scientific studies that have proven that it does help to reduce recidivism. And so if it can help to keep people out of jail, to keep them as active members in our community, to keep them involved, why wouldn't we do it?
Now, those are excellent points, and that leads us right into what the next part was. It was, what are the arguments against felony disenfranchisement? And you explained it, you know, very concisely. It brings you back into the community. I mean, when you're part of that political process, and you know, since I learned the value of, you know, political discourse, being engaged, you know, I realized that everything is really politics. Anything that is, you know, one person's agenda versus another person's agenda and coming to some kind of compromise, right? Whether that be at the individual level or the collective. And, you know, that is the beauty of our democracy. So to not be able to participate in that, for me, it stays on my mind quite often. And on top of that, having served 2 tours in Iraq, and then having gone through prison and seeing other veterans, Iraq and Afghanistan veterans in prison, and then, you know, not knowing where they are now. You know, we don't have a strong chance at making out of these situations, you know, with the suicide rate, addiction, things like that of combat veterans. So I mean, it really hits at every level. And yeah, I think that there is, you know, the wider we expand access to the vote, the better our society is going to be. So yeah, I think that it's pretty easy to talk in favor of getting rid of felony disenfranchisement and non-felon disenfranchisement for people that are currently incarcerated. One thing that I wanted to touch on, and Karen, I think that, well, we both, having been in that meeting today, just in case there's anybody else out there from another county listening that does want to approach, you know, their county jail, their elected officials about starting a voting process within the jail. There was a lot of lessons learned. The only thing that I'll say on this before Karen, you take over with some of the details of what we discussed today. You know, public comment, like Melissa mentioned earlier, is extremely valuable. You know, have your comments heard at the county board, have your comments heard at the city council, at the Judiciary and Law Enforcement Committee, if you have a criminal justice collaborating council, have your comments heard. You can have them heard multiple times per month, and let people know, let your representatives, your administrators know that you want your jail, people in your jail, to have access to vote, the ones that are eligible. And then Karen, if you could go over some of the, you know, the I guess the smaller details that we talked about today that you might not think about if you're starting to launch a campaign for voting in jail.
Yeah, and I know, you know, the devil is in the details. I think we're going to find that that's very true as we work through this process. And we've already identified a few potential weak links, and I know we're going to think of more. So to register to vote, you have to prove where you live. This is where we're getting into the detail part. And for someone who's in jail, proving where you live, the law is that your residence is where you were living prior to being entering the jail system. So that is your residence for voting. But if you don't have, perhaps you don't have, you don't have a letter that's got letterhead on it from an official or from a business that identifies your name and your address. That's the kind of thing that's often used to prove your residence. Having a driver's license that is also used to prove your residence. But if you did not enter jail with your driver's license in your pocket and therefore being held with your other belongings, getting hold.
Did we lose her for a second?
In our meeting yesterday. Pardon?
Oh, we just lost you for a second. You're back.
Okay, all right, yeah, it's this is rural internet out here. So I'm sorry about that. I think just to summarize, you know, proving your residence. When you to vote, to gain the right to vote, you have to prove, first of all, where you live. That's how you get registered to vote. When you go to vote, whether you're voting absentee or whether you're voting in person, you have to prove who you are. And as of, I think it was 2016, not all that long ago, a law was passed to say that you had to have a photo ID in order to vote, a valid photo ID in order to vote. That's maybe another form of voter suppression. It's a lot harder for some people to get photo IDs than it is for other people. But so when if you're a voter or a potential voter in jail, everything gets a little bit harder. Getting that proof of where you live, getting that proof of who you are, having a photo ID, a valid photo ID for the purpose of voting, can be a real challenge. So we're kind of working our way through this. If those that information is among your belongings when you enter jail, it simplifies the process because photos or scans can be taken of that information and then utilized in the process of getting that person registered or getting that person an absentee ballot. It gets more complicated when that information is not in your belongings. The inmate needs to be able to contact somebody, a friend or family member, who might be able to get that information for them and bring it to the jail so that it can be scanned and utilized. So these are the issues that we're going to find. Just how do we make it work? How do we adapt so that we can make this work for people in jail? There's some potential changes in the rules or laws for voting that might also work, and a fairly creative one that I don't think has been thought of outside of perhaps Eau Claire County at this point is that, well, here's an example. If you're hospitalized just before an election and you had planned on voting, you got to do something. And the rules have been accommodated for that situation. A hospitalized person can designate an agent to go get, they have to have certain information with them, but to go get a ballot for someone, bring it to the hospital, let them fill out that ballot, complete the necessary paperwork to go with it, and then transport it back to your municipal clerk. Why not extend that sort of process to somebody who's incarcerated? It's an idea that I think is worth pursuing. These are all the kinds of nitty-gritty details for making this work that we're going to be coming up against in upcoming weeks as we move through this process. So those are just a few of the examples I can think of things that we're talking about. Keeping the volunteers safe when they come in. And I'm not talking physical safety. That's not even a concern on the table. What I'm talking about is COVID. That has to be addressed so that we can get in and our volunteers won't have to worry about being exposed to COVID when they're in there. So we're already talking about the nitty-gritty details of putting the pieces in place to make this process work. David, did I miss anything? Are there?
That was covered it very well. The hospital elector, hospitalized elector. That was fantastic suggestion suggested by Captain Rivestall. Which I think that's something that is extremely important. Over the last few months, there's been situations where there was kind of conflict between like say like a role like mine, and certain administrators in other areas, not this captain, but maybe other people, and that really prevents a lot of things from moving forward. But in this case, Captain Rivestall, I mean, he was completely forthcoming and motivated to make this work. And I mean, it's awesome when you have both sides really trying and open to hearing ideas. I mean, you can make anything happen. So, one thing I did want to touch on: do not, the municipal clerk will verify citizenship through the ID, right? So if you're a person listening and you end up going to a jail and, starting this process, and the jail starts asking, well, do we have to verify citizenship? No. The municipal clerk will do that. So that is all left up to the municipal clerk. Eligibility is left up to the municipal clerk, and all the jail needs to do is facilitate the process, just like they're doing here with Chippewa Valley Votes, Karen, other volunteers going in. So that was the only thing that I wanted to touch on.
Yeah, and another way to look at that is for anybody that that votes, you have to have a photo ID at this point. And so anybody when you go to get your driver's license, your status as a citizen or a green card holder, that has to be recorded when you get your driver's license. The same when you get your Wisconsin photo ID. So that your status as a citizen is attached to the document that you get from the government that provides you with a photo ID. So when you fill out your voter registration application and it asks at the top, are you a citizen of the United States? That's a verifiable question that's being asked. If you say, yes, I'm a citizen, that information can be verified because of the documentation that you've already had to obtain in order to vote. And that means that if you answer these questions in a way that's not truthful and at the end of the registration process say that you have told the truth, those answers are verifiable. So you really don't have to worry about the jail looking up that information or verifying citizenship.
Anything else from either Melissa and Nycki? Okay, I'm just going to say a couple of words in closing, and then we'll have time for questions to any of our panelists to answer. So 2020, more so than many of the years past, has, through pandemic and social unrest, made visible the frail nature of our democracy. We are at a period when each person must take accountability for the preservation of liberty, not just for those who look like them or live in the same communities, but for Americans as a collective. Each of our freedoms are dependent upon the treatment of our fellow citizens, refugees, and immigrants. We are all interconnected, and so therefore, those with the ability to do so must cast their ballots to amplify their voice and the voices of the disenfranchised, oppressed, and marginalized. Thank you to each of my panelists for joining this Rights for All Eau Claire discussion, and we can open it up to questions.
Yeah, so it looks like we got one question earlier in the chat, and I'm just pulling it up for you. That question is, and this is more of a national take, just to preface, the question is, do all states prevent felons from voting? If so, what is the range of time for disenfranchisement?
I can take a crack at that if you'd like. Every state's voting regulations differ. So when somebody asks me a question, say a student from Minnesota asks me a question when we're doing voter registration, I have to refer them back to their particular state's rules. I think an example that's been in the news, and Dave, you may know this better than me, David, Florida was in the process of I believe that their voters could not vote until all fines associated with their conviction had been paid. Do you want to take it from here, David? I just don't remember it exactly, but it's not the same rule as we have. They attempted to remove it, and it looked like they were going to be successful, and in the end, I think it got voted down. Or do you remember the details?
I know as much as you do. I just know about it.
Okay.
And, hearing briefly.
So basically the example I gave is, it illustrates that the original rules that they had in Florida were different from the ones that we have here in Wisconsin, and they differ from state to state. So that that's not a question that I'm able to answer in terms of the length of voter disenfranchisement based on probation.
Is different. And just a little extra background information about the, the shirts that Nycki and I are sporting here on Lock the Vote. Representative Jody Emerson, and I believe it was Senator Taylor, submitted legislation in the summer of 2019. And they wanted to give everybody back the right to vote when they're out on supervision. And so that, if that would have gone into effect and if that would have been passed, that would have given 66,000 people the right to vote that don't currently have the right to vote in Wisconsin. So that's close to the population of Eau Claire, if you put that into perspective. And with, 5 and change million people living in Wisconsin, that's a large percentage. So it varies, it's constantly changing, but there is information out there that you can look up for each state, because each one is a little bit different.
Thank you for that. Anything else from any of my panelists? You guys are awesome. I love working with each of you, and I'm looking forward to the continuation of our work in this area. Raisha, do we have anything else as far as comments or questions? If not, I think that will be a wrap.
I don't think we have any more questions in either of the chats, but I'll do a quick follow-up to the initial person's question about national or other states' felony disenfranchisement rules. The way that I understand it is that there are sort of 4 categories, and depending on which state is in which category will determine the length of disenfranchisement. So there is some states who don't disenfranchise at all. Whoop, whoop, they're the best. There's a few states who disenfranchise only for the term of incarceration. Wisconsin falls in the 3rd category, which disenfranchises both during the time of incarceration and while they're on extended supervision, probation, parole. And then there's even some states that disenfranchise, unfortunately, and indefinitely almost, or like you need a pardon or something like that to be able, until your rights are restored. So it really just depends on the state, and you can look up that information just by searching in Google, which states allow people convicted of felonies to vote. I will say, though, this panel has done a great job of articulating the outreach that's necessary to clarify some of those things. We are in conversation with even people in Wisconsin who talk about, we call it automatic rights restoration, which means that, once I've completed my term of incarceration, as well as my term of probation, parole, extended supervision, my rights are automatically restored. But do I know that? What information has been shared with me to make that clear, and to really actively engage me in the process, right? So I think where states are varies across the country, and the most important thing is that we're doing the work to change that. And if you know people who are experiencing some form of disenfranchisement and who need more information, David or I or any of the folks on this panel really, I'm sure, could help get you the information that they need.
Yeah,
but I think there are no more questions.
Sorry, that's what I put in the comments section for anybody on the Zoom meeting, and for anyone on Facebook watching, Facebook Live, you can hit me at Rights for All Eau Claire Facebook page. I'll respond. You can hit me on my Facebook page, and I can connect you with anybody on this panel, and also anybody else as far as resources. One piece, Karen, what I was hearing on the news, because the thing about Florida was just in the news, it was Bloomberg was going to pay all the fines of individuals that owed money so they'd be eligible to vote. That's something that's just recently, and someone just reminded me of that. So thank you, Patty Fetty. So yeah, if there's nothing else, thank you guys again, and everyone have a great night.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Want to stay on 1 second? I'll talk to you guys after we get off Facebook and stuff.
All right, we're off the live stream. I'm turning off the recording. Give me 1 second.